Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Councillor Steve Pitt. I'm the leader of the Portsmouth City Council, and I will be chairing this meeting. Got a bit of housekeeping information before we get started. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts, and please assemble by Queen Victoria's statue in Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. Everyone speaking via a microphone will be recorded and broadcast on the website. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting, on our understanding it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those explicitly stating they do not wish to be recorded. Please can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they are finished. And a reminder that due to a technical failure, we do not have a hearing loop for Councillor Hunt today, so everybody must speak into the microphone and clearly so he is not disadvantaged in this meeting. We have all read the reports, so officers are going to highlight developments that occurred since publication, but because this is consideration of the local plan, we may need a more detailed conversation as we go through. Are there any deputations today? There are none. Any apologies for absence? No, we are all here. Members, any declarations of interest? None. Okay. Record of the previous meeting held on the 5th of March 2024. Have you seen the minutes of the previous meeting? I'm happy to propose them as a true record. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Hugh Mason, thank you very much. Those minutes are approved, colleagues. Yes? Yes, thank you. Moving on to item 4 on the agenda today, the Portsmouth Local Plan. It's the draft pre-submission stage. Needless to say, this is probably the most significant item we are going to consider this municipal year. Our purpose today is to settle our view and pass it through to full council for the full council meeting at the end of the month, which will also be a one-item agenda to make sure that this is given proper focus. So the committee report is before you, but I'll hand over to Lucy to introduce it. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm here to present the local plan and its sustainability appraisal, habitat regulations assessment, policies map and integrated impact assessment for you to make a recommendation to full council on the 28th of May. The recommendation from officers is to approve the local plan and its supporting documents for public consultation and then for submission for examination in public to the Planning Inspectorate. This comes after a short pause during which we talked to government about Tipner West and City Deal. The advice from government was to make progress with both the local plan and the allocation. It is an important decision as the local plan will guide the development of the city for the next 15 years. I'd like to explain a bit why we think you should approve the local plan. First of all, it's the best plan for the city. It's a carefully considered plan that's right for the city. It is ambitious for growth with big allocations such as the city centre, but mindful of the city's physical constraints, its island geography. This is why we can't meet our housing need. It's backed by a comprehensive evidence base on all matters of background such as transport, housing and employment. It's gone through 4 rounds of public consultation and we have responded to all the feedback. All members of the council have been involved in its formulation, including recent briefings by party and to all new members. And I must flag up that there is a national deadline to submit the local plan for examination by the 30th of June next year. If we miss that deadline, we will have to start all over again under an as yet unknown new system, and that would come at huge expense. There are 3 main issues I wanted to raise. Firstly, affordable housing, which is policy PLP 17 and is paragraph 4.15 of the report. We have an ambitious 30% policy, which is what you members have told us that you want for the city. It will be challenged at examination. This is because of poor viability in the city, which is evidence being brought to the fore with the update on our viability evidence. HMOs covered by Policy PLP 20 and paragraph 4.16 of the report. Another big issue for the city. The policy before you is a strict new policy with a concentration test of 10%. It doesn't allow sandwiching of a non-HMO property between two HMOs, and it doesn't allow a row of 3 or more HMOs. The third issue is Tipner West and Horsey Island East, which is the biggest risk to the local plan, as explained in the report. The Habitat Regulations Assessment, which is part of the supporting document, which we will consult on, goes beyond the standard stages and includes the 3 derogation tests of alternatives, imperative reasons of overriding public interest, and compensation. You as members are being asked to vote on whether the imperative public interest benefits outweigh the adverse impact on the international nature designations in Portsmouth Harbour. Thank you very much, and I commend the plan to you.
Thank you, Lucy. I've got a couple of questions before I pass over to colleagues, just for clarification in case anyone's watching the meeting today. In terms of the overriding reasons of public interest and Tipner West and the implications around habitat regulation assessment, I'm pretty clear, I think, that it's the case that it's required even if we did not build on the land south of the firing range, because it's required for what is the northeast corner, which is the designated land for future marine employment. So it's not the case that if we weren't looking at the land south of the firing range as a potential option, that we wouldn't still need IROPE and the HRA in order to be able to proceed with the employment land on the northeast corner. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. You need to do the derogations whether or not land south of the firing range is built on.
Okay, second question from me. In terms of the affordable housing element, as you said, we've gone for 30%. For anyone watching, developers do what are known as economic viability assessments for most significant planning applications. There's a sort of understanding that there's an allowance of between 15 and 20% generally developer profit on those sorts of schemes, and that if the developer can evidence that they're not going to make between 15 and 20% profit on the scheme, they can use that as an argument against including an affordable housing contribution, and that would be the case whether our percentage is 20 or 30%. Is that correct?
Yes, we live in a market economy, and so houses get built in the private sector only when there is a profit, and so a certain percentage of profit is built into the calculations, viability calculations.
And also in terms of the HMO policy, is it the case that no local authority with planning powers in England at the moment has a policy of 5% that automatically kicks in? There are one or two that are discretionary, and the only exception is Blackpool, where it focused particularly because of the number of former guest boarding houses with the decline of their tourist economy. Ian may want to answer this.
Yes, that is correct. West Lancashire, in one of their towns, which is a small town of around 30,000 people, has a university of around 10,000 students. They have a sliding scale where part of that town has a 5% policy, other parts have 15%. But yeah, other than that, it's Blackpool, and everybody else is 10, 20% or higher.
And follow up to that, Ian, when Thanet attempted to reduce their percentage from 10% to 5%, that was overturned by the inspector, and now they don't even have 10%, they have a discretionary policy that's judged on each application. Is that correct?
Slight correction, they weren't even going that far. They were looking to retain a historic 5%, and even that retention of 5%, they weren't even trying to tighten it, was deemed to have gone too far. Retaining it in the modern setting without the necessary evidence meant that they couldn't justify, and that 5% was removed from the policy by the inspector and placed through modification into supporting text as guidance. So
is it fair to say that Portsmouth's policy on HMOs, which is intended to ensure a distribution across the city and prevent over-intensification in those areas where there are already high numbers of HMOs, is as robust as anything else in England?
we are very confident that is the case.
Thank you very much. That's enough from me, colleagues. Lee?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. But asked a lot of questions that I would have asked. Go back to the Thanet one, and I hope I read the most recent one. But when I looked at their policy, did I read it right that this 5% covered but only 2 wards within the town, or was it the whole district?
The Thanet example was the whole district.
If I can help there, Chairman, it is their policy HO 19, houses in multiple occupation, which has as its second element, development will be permitted where it does not result in an intensification or concentration of such uses, which is detrimental to the character of the neighbourhood, having regard to the guidance in paragraph 11.4. That was 5%, that they were only allowed to have it as guidance. And the appeal decisions which have come, I've seen in Thanet, suggest that the planning inspectorate does not take kindly to guidance. They want something much firmer than that.
Yes, may I continue? Thank you, Councillor Mason. And now, is it correct then that they rely on space standards and all the other MPPF guidelines rather than a robust policy of, let's say, 10% that we have here in Portsmouth? In other words, Ms Maguire, if there is an application that goes over 10% or is 10% plus, it will be rejected. But in Thanet, you would have to look at other considerations.
Yes, it's correct that they have a policy guidance that states that they would like to see no more than 5%, but they are reliant on a case-by-case interpretation on the individual matters before each application of whether or not that would create a harmful imbalance within their communities.
Very lastly, and if this council were to adopt that 5% approach, I presume, therefore, that we would end up in the same situation as them, is that developers would be arguing that each case should be treated on its own individual merits, having regard to 5%, but they would argue that they should have their planning permission because they meet all the other MPPF guidelines.
If we were to adopt a 5% approach, then it would become policy. But to adopt it, we would have to obviously put it into the proposed plan with the necessary evidence, and which would undeniably be challenged by, in particular, those landlords that are seeking to provide more HMOs in the city, and justify that through the examination in public. That's what Thanet tried to do. It's really the only precedent we can point to as far as precedent is relevant, and they failed to do so. By attempting to adopt, it got removed, and they're down to having no direct control and only the indirect assessment. So if it got through the process, it would be a new percentage that would apply, but it didn't in Thanet, despite a long period of time where it was effectively utilised by the council as their local plan policy. It is very doubtful, in officers' opinion, that it would be able to survive examination in public in Portsmouth.
So, Leader, lastly, I'm sure you'll agree with me that Thanet ended up with egg on its face.
I think that's a fair assessment, Lee, yes. Members? Darren?
Just a couple of questions. Firstly, for Ian and Lucy, in paragraph 3.6, you talk about the briefings for the other political groups. Has there been a briefing to the Conservative group?
We've offered one, but no, there's been no request for one.
Okay. And that offer still remains available
Of course,
between now and the
yes,
28th of May?
absolutely. We would love to do that.
That's fine. Thank you. My second question is actually for the Chief Executive in the absence of the Director of Finance. It relates to Tipner West. Full Council has rejected the so-called do-nothing option, which requires still habitats assessments and all that sort of stuff. If in the Full Council meeting a group decided to, or Council voted to bring back the do nothing option, which may well mean various forms of the city deal money go west, to be colloquial, and that means we might have to incur further costs. Would that be deemed acceptable in financial terms, or would that be such a variance that actually it wouldn't be allowed, basically, on grounds of, you'd have to find out where the money's coming from?
Thank you. So I'm aware of the city deal, so we have obviously the contractual obligation with the government on delivering that. If we don't deliver it, there of course is the question about what will you return? Not all of the funding has been spent, or for the funding that has been spent, whether or not we'll be asked to give some of that back. But the do nothing option is still not an option for us because we still need to protect the site, whatever the option is. So just to leave it as it is with the contamination and the land remediation that's required, some of the sea defence work, etc., we're still going to have to do some significant work, which are several £1 million, just to keep it as is, status quo today. So doing nothing is still going to be a very expensive option for us either way.
Okay. Thank you for that. Those are my two questions. Steve?
Thanks, Darren. I just want to apologise to members because I'm now aware that I didn't go around the room and do introductions at the beginning, but it's because we started late and I was trying to find a chair that I wasn't in screaming pain in. So apologies for that. I don't think we need to do it at this late stage. People will realise who we are. But I won't do it again. Any members, any other comments? Councillor Hunt again.
Yes, mine is back to the HMO question, just for consistency. Can you tell us, Mr Maguire, is it possible to write into the plan that there should be no more HMOs in Portsmouth at all? And if that is not possible, why is it not possible?
Similar to the previous answer, it's possible to write it into the plan. It has, in my professional opinion, no chance of surviving an examination in public, having attempted to so write. Blackpool is the only authority that has a ban on HMOs across its area, and that's because they have an extraordinarily over-provision of single dwelling persons due to the changing tourist attraction and desires of holidaymakers more than anything else. Over the years, they have very detailed and compelling evidence of the direct link to overriding antisocial behaviour and other deprivation-linked issues to single-person properties, and consequently, for a number of years, they have had a 0% HMO policy in effect. That has led, from my cursory review of their planning register, to less than a dozen planning applications being made from HMOs in the past 20 years in Blackpool, because there's so many small units, single-person flats and HMOs, hostels, etc. in the city, that there is no need for more HMOs. So consequently, there is no challenge, one would assume, from the market seeking to build new HMOs, as there's plenty there already. That's not the case, of course, in Portsmouth, where we do know there is notable market demand for more HMOs, and consequently there would be challenge to such a policy, meaning that we would have to provide clear and compelling evidence of such a low percentage. I go back to the Thanet example, a relatively recent inspector's assessment, where 5% was proposed, and the inspector in his report there notified that there was insufficient evidence for such a blanket approach for 5%. That's true in Thanet, despite the fact they had been applying that policy for a while. The same argument was undeniably true in Portsmouth. There is insufficient evidence to apply 0% in Portsmouth to our professional knowledge.
Councillor Mason.
Questions relating to Tipner West. Were we to decide not to build on Tipner West, are there other sites in Portsmouth where we could accommodate the houses which we would not build, firstly, and secondly, where we could accommodate the manufacturing industry which we propose to put in the north of that area?
Thank you. We've done a robust housing and economic land availability assessment that looked at sites across the city, and there are no alternative sites for the housing or for the businesses. And I'd like to say, in regards to the marine hub that we want to create at Tipner West. There isn't another site across the Solent where, with deep water access, where you could build such a marine hub. That is a very important driver for the development.
Knowing what I do of the geography of this country, if it is not able to build on the Solent, the obvious answer would be that this industry will be found in Bremerhaven or Esbjerg.
Yes, it's certainly the only place on the south coast, I think, where there's any possibility at all of doing this.
Yeah, and it would seem to me, Chairman, that the type of industry we're developing will be on South Coast or nowhere else in this country.
I think I agree, Hugh, and I think it's worth noting that the entire prioritisation for our economic strategy as a Solent region for the last decade has been focused around marine and maritime industrial growth and creating high-skilled jobs to grow our local economy. If we were to not take advantage of the only remaining location on the south coast of England to do that, that would be highly irresponsible and hugely detrimental to future economic growth forecasts for the area. Anyone else? Members? Matthew, sorry.
Thank you, Steve. Just a question regarding the sites that are down as site allocations. It would just be, I think, be helpful to, excuse me, helpful to understand the rationale behind why they are site allocations, and also if any of those site allocations are currently allocated sites on the current local plan.
Yeah, thank you. We've got two sets of allocations. We've got our strategic sites, and when we consult...
Can I just be clear? I'm just talking about the site allocations, not the strategic sites.
Yeah, sure. With the site allocations, we've added them since the Regulation 18 plan. You give more certainty that you can deliver your housing target if you allocate sites rather than just reliant on planning permissions and windfall to come forward. All the sites that we've allocated, not only are they of a sufficient size, so they're going to deliver a lot of homes. By allocating them, you set policy requirements, and through those policy requirements, you get added benefits for the city. Thank you.
And, sorry, Ian, I think you're going to answer the second part.
The question, are they in the existing plan? Of the site allocations, the only site that is in the existing plan is Port Solent and Horsey Island open space. Of the site allocation, obviously strategic sites, there's a number of crossovers there. Most of the other site allocations, and as I'm saying that, I'm starting just to... Fraser Range obviously is within the seafront allocation, but it's not exactly the same. Also, that's a broader seafront policy in the 2012 plan rather than a Fraser Range allocation, which it is in the new plan. So it does fall within that zone of allocation, but it's a very different policy, I would suggest. But in terms of actually replicating through, obviously, the strategic allocations are obviously very similar to those that appear in the 2012 plan. The site allocations, Port Solent and Horsey Island, have effectively moved down into that category, and the other site allocations are new sites, as Mrs. Howard has said. We've identified as a key opportunity to provide greater certainty for that slightly smaller, still significant units of development within the city.
Thank you. Yeah, so just for clarification, so in the existing local plan, there was a different sort of formula in terms of a seafront allocation, of which Fraser Range was a part, rather than there being, as we've got now, something that was more specific to Fraser Range.
Yes, that's correct.
Hugh?
Coming to the HRA, the Habitat Regulations, are you satisfied that we have taken as comprehensive and as a robust investigation with our advisors on this matter as is possible?
Yes, I am. We've worked very hard on this. We've used James Riley from ACOM, who I've worked with for many years, who's the leading expert on HRA. We've also commissioned Toby Fisher, who's a barrister who specialises in HRA matters, and we have worked very hard on the subject. We've also worked with the regulatory panel, including the RSPB, the Wildlife Trust, Natural England, who have helped us with our work on the HRA and on the policy.
Members, anyone else? No? Sure. Okay, in that case, I just want to express disappointment at the government's change of mind about the how far we could go on some of the environmental and sustainability policies that we had wanted to include in the plan. But we are where we are, and we've got to hope that a new government does bring that forward in the way that we'd hoped. If they do, Lucy, presumably, and the MPPPF's been updated, does that give us an opportunity to bring forward an SPD at a future date? Supplementary planning document for anyone listening online.
Yes, it does. But what I really hope is that the government gets a move on and brings higher standards, these higher standards in through building regulations, so that each local plan doesn't have to prove it. They just have to make every builder do them.
Hallelujah. Councillor Hunt, who can now hear. Fabulous.
Are we allowed to make a comment now? Is that all right? I didn't know if Councillor Mason wanted to go first or whatever. All right, I have a bit to say. I'm terribly sorry. I want to say, first of all, a big thank you to all the officers who have brought forward this exciting plan for Portsmouth. And it's a plan that embraces the future, a future that's increasingly monopolised by artificial intelligence, green technologies, climate change, and regeneration. And I think that a lot of this is reflected in this truly excellent plan. There's no question about it. Throughout every stage of preparation, we've consulted and consulted and consulted as we strive to deliver a local plan that everyone has a stake in and everyone has had the chance to influence. And members, whilst Councillor Mason was Lord Mayor, I had the pleasure of looking after that portfolio, during which time we did so many member consultations, which were reasonably well attended, and we did listen. And I would like to point out that, for example, Cosham councillors raised concerns over density in the town centre there about homes. And we worked with them, and thanks to Lucy, we found a compromise which was accepted. And we want to build local homes for local people. We have a council waiting list of around 1,500 people. Those people, and I want to put it on record, are desperate for their own front door, a place to call their home and their house. That is a basic human right. And we are, thanks to Darren and this administration, already building such homes. However, and it is a massive but, failure, and I've said this so many times, failure of successive governments since the war to build homes now seems political parties across the board rushing to catch up. And things are not going to change after the next general election. The current government wants 17,700 homes built here. It's astonishing, and when you tell people, and we've had the election recently, you told people on the doorsteps that they were absolutely bowled over. They didn't understand. And it's part of the drive to build 1 million homes UK-wide. We know it is not possible to build 17,700 homes here, and we have to thank the officers who work diligently to provide evidence in this local plan to the government inspector, proving that around 14,400 is the maximum limit. And that means we will be submitting a plan to the council and subsequently to the planning inspector with 3,300 fewer than is being demanded. But that is still a lot. And we are also in talks with neighbouring authorities around us to try and reduce that by 800 still further. I know a lot of this will be talked about in the council, but some of it will get lost, I'm sure. And during consultations, HMOs came up, as officers have mentioned this afternoon, including with councillors. HMOs, or shared housing, are a symptom of this failed housing policy, which has forced up the prices of homes and rents to such an extent that owning or renting more homes is out of reach for so many people. For those people, the option of sharing a house is the best or only way to meet their accommodation needs. And the demonisation of this form of housing is not the answer to our local housing issues. Wanting to give individuals a key to their own front door of their own home is the right way. We see more and more examples of this council doing that. Only recently, Councillor Adair and I spent 2 hours at Tipner with residents and officers consulting on 6 one-bedroom flats for a total of 12 people, council housing. It was brilliant to see the passive house approach, which will be in this plan, reducing the consumption of energy in those homes by around 50%. I would like to add that just because the plans envisages 14,400 homes does not mean a single house will be built. And I know some will be, many will be. But the public also expect more GPs, dentists, school places and roads as they hear about these houses that need to be built. And we have been telling or trying to explain that the truth is the government has failed to deliver on this vital infrastructure, but it is still demanding thousands more homes. Lastly, no matter what colleagues may wish for whatever reason, politics or whatever, or misleading people, although the local planning authority may throw out HMOs, we have seen recently, and increasingly so, the developers will go to appeal. And we've seen the last two at Margate Road and at North End Avenue only recently, as they have been allowed after the local planning authority rejected them. So the current HMO policy, without question, and based on what we've heard today about things that have happened in other places like Thanet, together with the tough licensing regime that Darren has brought in to control HMOs and push up standards, is the correct way forward for our city to protect communities and mixed and balanced communities. I'm sorry to have gone on so long.
Not at all, Lee. I was hanging on your every word as usual. So any comments from anyone? Hugh?
I've been concerned not only with the development of this document, but with its predecessors in 2006 and 2012. And what has been impressive about this document is the extent to which we have consulted, the extent to which we have drilled down into the experience of other places in order to produce this document. This document, I think, is a remarkably robust document. It is comprehensive. The important things about housing have been mentioned by Councillor Hunt, but also it is looking to the economy, because the economy is the thing which will drive this city. If we don't get our economy right, well, we probably won't need the housing because no one will want to live here. We have looked at the manufacturing side of the city's economy, the transport side, the port. We have looked at the social and cultural offer of this city. All is in here in the allocations which we have. This is a very comprehensive plan, not just for housing, but for the way forward for this city. It is a high-level plan, and as we all know, we have very few tools in our toolkit which will enable us to put it into practice. What we can do, I think, is to accept this, to take it and use it as councillors and as a council to push for the type of developments which are seen here, to urge government to invest in this city, but also to encourage private investment in housing, in industry, in recreation within the city. It is a very comprehensive document, and I certainly am very proud to have been, in a small way, associated with its development. I would certainly commend it to Council.
Thank you, Hugh. Any more comments? No, in that case, I'll sum up where I think we're at. I'd also like to echo Lee's comments about the amount of work that's gone into this and the quality of the local plan that we have. We know that other areas not too far away from us, but I won't name names, have run into real difficulty recently with their local plans being wholesale rejected and sent back for to have another go. And I don't think we are there. We have the challenge around Tipner West, and it is asking for the examiner of the plan to look at this in a very different way than any other local plan that has been looked at before. It's the first time it's come up. But it has to come up because it's appropriate, and we need to know exactly where we stand and what we can and cannot do. And to not have it in there at all would be disastrous, and we would not be able to fulfil our housing numbers. We would also be losing a huge opportunity around that marine employment site. So it is important it's in there, and that people hold their nerve on this, because it's not just about the firing range. That's for other decisions down the road, subject to HRAs and IROB decisions, etc. But we have to have that employment land in there, which necessitates its inclusion anyway. So a massive thank you to the team for the work they've done. I think what's reflected this afternoon is that there's virtually, in fact, no challenge to anything that is in this local plan. It is sound, it is robust, and it will stand up to examination, and that's extremely important with that timetable that we do have. Messing about with it now at the full council meeting for some grandstanding at a public meeting that nobody's watching would be foolhardy and irresponsible. There is something else I wanted to add, though, because I attended the planning training that Ian gave this week. I haven't sat on the planning committee since 2021, so wanted to be responsible and go along. Councillor Horton joined me, and we listened carefully to what Ian had to say. And he actually quoted something on one of his slides that is a quote that I use quite regularly, and I think it's the difference between people who come into public office in order to try to do the best for the local authority that they serve, and those who are determined to focus on very localised issues. It has to be a balance of the two. You cannot just focus on what one particular ward wants. We have 14 wards in Portsmouth. Issues like temporary accommodation, public amenity space, the environment, housing demand, these are city-wide problems. And if you're going to be the administration of a city, you have to put on your big boy pants, and you have to say, sorry to appropriate that from the girls, but you have to do that, and you have to be responsible and look at communities as a whole. And the quote I'm referring to is by Edmund Burke, and I'm going to paraphrase it, which will drive Ian mad, but I'm going to use the bit of it that matters and leave out the subordinate clause, which will also upset Matthew. But the quote is that your Member of Parliament, and for that copy and paste councillor, owes you their judgment. They betray rather than serve you if they sacrifice it to your opinion. So we have to listen to what all of the residents in this city say on the doorsteps, but it's then up to us to use the vast knowledge that we have about how a council operates, the laws that it has to operate within, and the policies that are required to run a sensible and pragmatic administration and apply that in a grown-up and sensible way. I think that's what we intend to do, and I hope when it gets to the full council meeting, everyone else will do the same. It's Councillor Horton.
Unisex pants are available.
Thank you, Councillor Horton. A really important intervention, perhaps the most important intervention this afternoon. So, members, we have before us the Portsmouth local plan for the draft for pre-submission. Are we happy to recommend this document through to the full council meeting at the end of the month? I'm proposing that. Can I have a seconder? Let's do it properly. Kimberly Barrett, all in favour? So approved. Ian, Lucy, you have the decision you needed. Thank you very much indeed.